Have you ever looked at an old family photo and just wondered, who were these people? Tracing your family history in the US can feel like this huge, impossible mystery. But honestly, it's more like a giant puzzle. And the best part is, every single piece you need to solve it is out there, just waiting for you.
But let's be real. How do you actually find someone who lived 200 years ago? I mean, we're talking about a time way before computers, when records were handwritten, if they were even kept at all. Well, that's exactly what we're going to break down today. The key to the whole thing is understanding how the records themselves have changed over time. Back in the colonial days, everything was super local and informal. You're looking at town meeting minutes and church baptism logs. Then in the 1800s, states started getting organized, requiring things like marriage certificates. And by the 20th century, boom, we get national systems and the digital age, which is what makes so much of this research possible from our living rooms. Okay, so here's our game plan. We're going to start with that evolving paper trail. Then we'll dive into the 4 absolute must-know record groups. These are your bread and butter. After that, we'll talk about where to actually find these clues, how to solve those really common, frustrating puzzles, and finally, how to pull it all together. Right, so starting with that paper trail, this is so foundational. I mean, knowing if your ancestor lived in a time of town ledgers versus standardized state records, that tells you what might even exist to be found in the first place. It's step 1. And that entire paper trail, through all those different eras, has basically left us with 4 major categories of records. Seriously, think of these as the fundamental building blocks for pretty much any American family tree. If you can get a handle on these 4, you're well on your way. First up, and you could argue the most important, are vital and church records. These are the non-negotiables. They give you the names, the dates, and the places, the actual skeleton that you hang all the other stories on. Without these, you're just making stuff up. And what I love about this is the mix of official documents and, well, unofficial ones. See, before states made birth certificates a thing, which for a lot of places wasn't until the early 1900s, a baptism record from a church, an inscription on a tombstone, or a note in the family Bible might be the only proof you'll find of a birth or death. All right, next up is the absolute cornerstone of U.S. genealogy, the census. Since 1790, every 10 years, the government has taken this incredible family snapshot of the entire country. This is how you track your family as they move across states and see exactly who was living together at any given time. It's amazing. Now listen up, because this is probably the single most important detail to remember about the U.S. Census. Before 1850, they only wrote down the name of the head of household. That's it. Everyone else was just a tick mark in a box for their age range. But from 1850 on, they listed every single free person by name. This was a massive, massive game changer for researchers. Okay, our third group, land and probate records. I know it sounds kind of dry, right? But trust me, these documents are absolute gold mines. They're not just about property, they're about people, families, and relationships. Just think about it. A will might be the only place you'll ever find a daughter listed with her married name, proving that connection. Or an estate file might list out every single thing a person owned, right down to their shoemaking tools, and suddenly you have a vivid picture of their life. This is where the story really starts to come alive. And that brings us to our 4th and final core group, immigration and military records. If your family came here from somewhere else, or if an ancestor served in the military, these records can blow your research wide open. And the level of detail you can find is just stunning. A World War I draft card gives you a full birth date and address, even a physical description sometimes. A passenger list from the 1920s can name the cousin they left it behind in Italy and the brother they were going to live with in Chicago. I've even seen Civil War pension files that have actual pages torn from a family Bible to prove a marriage date. Whew, okay, so we know what the records are. The next big question is, where in the world do you actually find all this stuff? Let's talk about the places you'll be looking, both the real ones and the ones online. The easiest way to think about this is like a pyramid or hierarchy. You usually start at the top with the big stuff. The National Archives, or NARA, is where you'll find those huge federal records like the census and military files. Then you go down a level to state archives for state-specific records. And finally, you get down to the county courthouse. That's where the most local stuff lives. The original deeds, wills, and marriage licenses created right where your ancestor lived. Of course, these days, so much of this is online. And there are 2 giants you need to know about:
Family Search, and Ancestry. The key takeaway here is that Family Search is 100% free. It's incredible, with billions of global records. Ancestry is a subscription service, but its search engine is super powerful, and its DNA features and user-submitted family trees are a huge deal. Honestly, you're probably going to end up using both. Sooner or later, it's going to happen. You're going to hit a wall. A name vanishes from the records, a document is missing, but these aren't dead ends. They're just puzzles, and every puzzle has a solution if you know the right tricks. Oh yeah, here it is, the classic nightmare scenario that makes every family historian's heart just drop. You finally figure out the county where your ancestor lived, you go to look for records, and you find out the courthouse burned to the ground in 1885. Is it game over? No way, not even close. For these burned counties, you just have to get creative. You can look at old tax lists, which are kind of like a mini census for every year. Check old newspapers for marriage announcements or obituaries. And my favorite tip, research their fan club. That's their friends, associates, and neighbors. Their records might just mention your family and solve your problem. Another really common puzzle is just the handwriting. Take a look at this word here. It looks like Mephisassets, doesn't it? But that funny little F-looking symbol is actually an old-fashioned way of writing the letter S. Learning to read old script, it's called paleography, is a skill you just pick up with practice. It's part of the fun. And what about names? If you can't find your ancestor, it might be because their name isn't what you think it is. Spelling wasn't a big deal back then, so clerks just wrote down what a name sounded like. And a ton of immigrants changed their names. Giuseppe became Joseph. You have to be flexible and search for every possible variation. Okay, so we've covered the what, the where, and the how. Let's pull all this together and get you ready to start your own path to discovery. This really sums it up perfectly. This whole thing isn't about finding one magic document that tells you everything. It's a process. It's about finding all these little clues in different places, understanding the world your ancestor lived in, and then patiently, piece by piece, putting their story together. You now have the basic toolkit you need to start solving your own family puzzle. You know about the court records, you know where to look for them, and you have some pro tips for the challenges you're going to face. So really, there's only one question left. Whose story are you going to uncover first?